So now we learned how we can target individual devices by using that token, or how we can target multiple devices in one go by using such a topic. Of course, up to this point, I always did that manually though. I sent a test message manually, or I created this campaign here manually. And for some use cases, that might be exactly what you want to do, but in many cases, this whole process should be automated. For example, here in this app, I actually don't want to send push notifications manually, but instead this should happen automatically whenever a new chat message was sent and received. So whenever a new chat message was added to my Firestore database in the end, whenever a new document is added to this chat collection, I want to send such a push notification to all users. That could be our requirement for this app. And to add this kind of automation, you need some code on your backend. Not some code in your Flutter app, but instead some code on your backend, on your remote backend, which can send out that push notification to all those devices. We can't do this in our Flutter app. We can't write the code for sending out that notification in the app here because we need that backend access. We need access to the configuration we added here to this Firebase project, and that information and configuration cannot safely be accessed from inside our Flutter app. Now, thankfully, adding code to a backend is quite straightforward. If you built your own custom backend, you did that by writing code anyways, so then you could add more code to it to also use a backend Firebase SDK to send such a message. But if you're already working in a Firebase project, it's even easier. There, under Build, you have this Functions area, which in the end allows you to add code to your backend that can be triggered and executed upon the occurrence of certain predefined events. Now, as you see here, you must upgrade your project to in the end have a paid plan before you can use functions. Now, you will actually be able to get started for free because there is a free tier available, so a certain volume of function executions for which you won't be charged, but you must have a paid plan, you must have a credit card added to your account. Then you can set up a budget, which in the end simply is a threshold, which controls when you'll receive an alert, an email alert, once you're approaching or exceeding this amount. You can learn more about the plan you're signing up to here on this plans page, and there you also learn what's included in this free tier. For example, that for these cloud functions, you're not going to pay for the first 2 million executions in every month. Now, with that set up, we can use this functions feature. We can get started with that. And for this, we'll actually need to install this tool here as a first step. And this tool, in order to be installed, needs another tool to be installed first, and that would be Node.js, which in the end is a JavaScript runtime, which we don't need for Flutter development in general, but which we will need for writing this function code and most importantly for installing that other tool I just showed you. So on nodejs.org, you should simply download the LTS version, whichever version that is at the point of time you're viewing this. So click this button, download this version, and then walk through that installer that gives you. And once you did install Node.js, you can copy this command here and run that in your terminal. On macOS and Linux, you might need to add sudo in front of that. On Windows, you don't need to add that, and trying to add it would give you an error. And here I actually got this accidental $sign at the beginning. Here we go. Now that's the proper command, and this now installs another Firebase tool, not a tool you need in general for building Flutter apps with Firebase, but a tool we will need for getting started with these cloud functions, for adding this backend code to Firebase. With that tool installed, as a next step, you should go through these two steps, which are presented to you here, by running Firebase init in your terminal, in your Flutter project here. And then here you have to choose which features you want to use. And even though we are using Firestore here, we're using it through the Flutter Firebase SDK already. So here you actually only need to choose functions by navigating there with the arrow keys and then hitting space to select it. You don't need to select anything else. And you can then hit enter and then choose use an existing project to link your existing project to this Firebase function we're about to add. And select that Firebase project you created before. And this will now set up this project for adding this functions code. And once we wrote a function, we can then run Firebase deploy to upload that function code to Firebase. But we'll do that later once we did write that function code. Now here, as part of the setup process, we're also asked whether we want to write this function with JavaScript or TypeScript, and you don't need to know either of these because I will give you the function code. So here we'll just use JavaScript. We don't need ESLint, so here I'll type N for no, and we can type Y for yes here to install any extra dependencies that are needed for this function code. Now once this setup process finished here, you should have a new functions folder in your Flutter project, and you got a couple of files in there, and it's the index.js file that matters for us here. This, in the end, is the file where you will put your JavaScript code, so not Dart code, JavaScript code, that will be uploaded to Firebase to run there as a function. So that's the backend code we can now add to our Firebase project. And if you would want to write your own functions, you would indeed need to dive into the official Firebase documentation to learn all about this functions feature, and you would need to learn JavaScript because Firebase Cloud Functions are written with JavaScript. But here for this demo app, I'm providing a finished function to you, and attached you find my finished index.js file, which should be used to replace your index.js file with. And this function code I created for you in the end sets up a function that listens to a new Firestore document being created. That's what we're doing here. And you can learn all about the available events here with this documentation link. But this in the end makes sure that whenever a new document is created on Firestore, this code here executes. And then we get access to the document snapshot that was created, so to the data that was created in the end. And we then use the Firebase admin SDK, which is a tool provided by Firebase for usage in JavaScript code, to use the cloud messaging service and send a new notification to a topic. And here I'm sending a message to the chat topic, of course on purpose, because that's the topic we're subscribing to in our Flutter apps. And then as a next step, the notification that is sent is configured by giving it a title that's coming from the snapshot data, so from the document that was added to Firestore. And here I'm accessing the username. And this code indeed does look quite similar to what we did here in our Flutter app when we output our chat messages. There we also worked with that snapshot data in the end, and we accessed the username and the text like this. We're doing a similar thing here and setting the username as a title and then the message text as a body. And username and text are of course keys that can be found in Firestore. So here, if you go to your Firestore database and you take a look at the chat documents, you find username and text as keys in those documents. And I'm extracting those keys here. And then this setting here simply controls which internal activity will be triggered in the app whenever this notification is tapped. It in the end will ensure that the app is opened. So that's the code that will be executed on the backend in Firebase whenever a new chat document is added. And therefore now we just have to make sure that this code gets pushed to Firebase and gets added to their servers. And to do that, you should open the terminal again and run Firebase deploy. And this will now upload this function code to Firebase and register it there so that it will be executed whenever we do add a new document to the chat collection. So let's wait for this deployment process to finish here. Here we go, the deployment process finished for me. And now with all of that deployed, if we restart our app and we send another message, testing cloud functions, this should now be delivered as a push notification to all subscribed devices. And as mentioned before, it can take a short while before the push notification does arrive because sending them to topics simply takes a bit longer, but eventually it should get here because of this cloud function that we set up. And you can go to this functions area and reload that functions page to get more information about your function and to, for example, also see the amount of executions here, the amount of requests received by that function, which in the end tells you how often it has been executed. Now, if you're not getting a push notification, you can also go to your function here and view the logs to see potential error messages. And for example, here for me, I got a status 401 error message, which indicates that we have some kind of permission error. And indeed, I got a project not permitted error here, as it seems. To get rid of this error, you should go to your project settings and under cloud messaging, also enable this cloud messaging API legacy. For that, you can follow this link here, which I get after clicking on these three dots, and click enable. With that enabled, you should now be able to get those push notifications. So if I test this again, and I then close this app, this push notification now does arrive. And that's how you can receive push notifications in Flutter. Now definitely also visit the official documentation to learn all about receiving push notifications and what you can configure there and different ways of handling incoming messages when the app is running in the background, in the foreground, and so on. But in a nutshell, that's how you can handle push notifications, and you therefore have a very broad toolset that hopefully helps you build your dream app.